Welcome, Loyalists and Traitors, to the grim darkness of the far future history. Future for us, past 40k. We're talking about Horus Heresy. Specifically, today I wanted to tackle a subject that came up in a comment of my most recent show endeavor that I've been doing, and that is The Emperor Protects. If you have not listened to it, this is a podcast I'm doing with my buddy Dan Bears over from the Cubic Shenanigans podcast. We're both huge lore fans of the Horus Heresy. Not as much the gaming thing, although I am getting into that, Dan's not. But we started putting out this podcast. We're on episode 1 right now. We had a 0, 1, and we're recording 2 later today as of the time of recording this. And one of the comments that came up in that video was this one here, and I'll read it to you. Amusing Park says, content request. I thought every legion went part and parcel to loyalist or heretic sides, and only recently learned that there were individuals who deviated from the direction of their legion. This fascinates me, and I'd love to learn more about the non-conformists, either as you progress or as a special episode. Now, I will say we are going to talk about that on the actual show, The Emperor Protects, but this is a video I wanted to put out for my channel as well, talking about the complexity of the Horus Heresy. I like this question since it highlights the blending of the free open sandbox nature of wargaming from fantasy universes like 40k, AOS, Conquest, any of those things where you can have any kind of matchup you want, to historical wargaming, where there are set sides and bespoke missions and all these kinds of deals. There is this idea that there's 9 legions on each side with a few ancillary forces, Mechanicum, that kind of stuff on that can kind of go both ways. But you have these 2 forces and nary the twain shall meet, and that's simply not true. It's not only not true from flavor texts that were given, but stated directly in multiple books. And we're going to unpack that because when you start to get into Horus Heresy, there's always bad actors in every community. People are afraid of some neckbeard saying you're doing it wrong. And I'm here to tell you that things are really murky with the Horus Heresy, to the point where even though they've created a historical, quote unquote, game, there's still infinite freedom to create whatever story that you want. Now, I'm going to throw a shameless plug up here for my Patreon account rather. On my Patreon, I'm going to be sharing the progress of my Lunar Wolves, or the Sons of Horus as they became known, because that's the legion I'm going to be building. My favorite lore-wise is Word Bearers, but from a gameplay perspective and collecting, I wanted to do the Sons of Horus. So if you'd like to follow along with that journey, join all the other incredible patrons who are already on there, and it would mean the world to me to throw just a couple bucks into my coffer. But getting back to the point of our conversation, Forge World started a fancy line of models way back when, I think it was 2005 or 6, when the first Horus Heresy novels from Black Library started coming out. Oftentimes, Forge World will simply make one-off models that were in support of, or at least reflections of, things that are going on in the greater lore of the story series. And the idea was, how do we approach Warhammer 40,000 with an eye towards historical wargaming, where you're trying to reenact something or create a specific scene from a greater conflict? Meaning, instead of playing in the vast open sandbox of the setting that is 40k, we are trying to create specific events that happened in the future past. It's a story instead of a setting. 9 Space Marine legions and their Primarchs fell to chaos and tore the galaxy in twain, in what is the most epic and ridiculous civil war that never happened. As such, we have very specific legions, soldiers, characters, locations, and all of that. And there's a fantastic series of books, these big leather-bound monstrosities that Forge World put out, that were very detailed, intense campaign books, and they gave you the entire background of each legion, their notable battles, any honors they've achieved, multiple color palettes, and you could actually trace their heraldry down to the squad leader level, and then just go all the way up and having exact icons and markings and all this stuff. It was very intricate, very detailed. This all goes into making Horus Heresy a fantastic type of historical style wargame. Bespoke characters, sides, classes, markings, everything. All the details that we have in real life from our own history books kind of translate into at least the wargaming aspects of this game. But there's one thing I want to comment on, and it's something that our original post or inspiration for the video touched on. There's a deep feeling that these factions are all on rails, meaning you can't deviate from them. And that is simply not true, right? That idea of you pick X Legion, which means you have to paint them, X color scheme, good or bad, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I'm here to tell you today that while Horus Heresy is structured like a historical game, there's actually an immense amount of freedom that you have within that setting. You can go against the traditional norms of your legion and create quote-unquote your dudes, meaning a little slice of your own story within the greater Horus Heresy, while still maintaining that seamless historical feel, which is important. I'm not talking about having Hello Kitty flavored, Space Marine legions from Terra or anything like that. Instead, what I mean is there's just a lot more freedom than people kind of give credit for. So let's break this down into a few points of ways that we can control how much freedom that we have with our historical wargaming. Keep in mind, if you want to do whatever sounds fun, just do it. Unless people are going to buy models for you, they can't tell you how to do your hobby. So do whatever you like. I'm just kind of giving a little bit of credence to the idea of, there is a way to play Horus Heresy because it is trying to specifically recreate historical things. So there is some level of accuracy and boundaries, but it's actually much more broad than people give it credit for. So let's talk about the way that Games Workshop writes the Heresy. The setting of Warhammer 40,000, which is their flagship game, is defined by a blurring of the past. The history of their own people is very ill-defined. I mean, when you look at the Horus Heresy, the Emperor does not assert any kind of deityship. Of course, you fast forward and they're worshipping him as a god. Abaddon is basically the devil poking out from hell to come capture whatever he wants. Great swaths of information have been hidden from the public. The average person doesn't even have access to basic education about these momentous moments in their own history. In fact, they are a people who do not know their history. Yes, in Black Library novels, we do follow very specific characters, but that is not to say that the entire Legion is defined by those characters, because all around them are vast war machines that they have nothing to do with. So, for example, you might read a book about Loken, this captain of the Sons of Horus, was here at a given time. But that doesn't mean all of the Sons of Horus were there with him, because every legion was kind of broken up into specific parties and groups and missions and expeditions and guarding ships and sent all across the Milky Way galaxy. The enormity of space is so incomprehensible, they can reasonably be just about anywhere. Marines were dispatched in all kinds of numbers, attached to all different kinds of missions, crusades, supply runs, everything. So when we read Horus Heresy books, remember, yes, this character and some of the Legion is here, but also the vastness of space and the size of the Great Crusade inherently means that other parts of that same Legion are off doing something completely different. And keep in mind that Space Marines, as they fight, they have wars and conduct themselves, they'll gain different ranks and battle armors, and oftentimes they'll change their painting scheme to reflect this. So you can have two, Legion units side by side that look different. Maybe they take from the same color palette, like let's say purple and white for Emperor's Children, but that will look different on them, unit to unit, because of what they've done across the galaxy. Even in those big Forge World books, they represent very specific campaign moments of surprise attacks, of betrayal, of assaults on specific fortresses or worlds or whatever. Keep in mind that within those are millions of small side stories of this unit in this specific place trying to accomplish a specific mission. Even if it doesn't seem to fit into the greater whole, those things happened. It's a collection of millions of individual stories that go into something like a worldwide campaign. See, the Battle for Calth or something like that. Now, the next thing to talk about is the idea of the unreliable narrator, or misinformation and disinformation. All those things happen in the Imperium because we read things in the Horus Heresy from a particular point of view. The absolute best example of this is the books that concern the planet Prospero. I'm not going to give a lot of spoilers, but there's a point in which the Space Wolves, led by Leman Russ, are dispatched to subjugate the Thousand Sons, led by Magnus the Red. The battle that they go into is called the Burning of Prospero. Now, there are two books to represent this battle. There's one from the perspective of the Space Wolves, one from the perspective of the Thousand Sons. They don't directly conflict with one another necessarily, but there are reasons and details and motivations for each side here. Well, the Imperial citizenry, all the histories that they know, would only ever know the Space Wolf side, if anything at all. So they can say whatever they want, and it will go down as history because history is written by the winners, which is a horrible sentiment, but absolutely true, particularly in the context of 40k. In fact, there is even a third book, a Forge World book, detailing the Battle of Prospero from a campaign playing perspective, and it was an insanely deep and detailed book that just brought together these different perspectives, and none of them directly contradict one another, but they don't all have the full picture. Even when you read the Forge World one, there will be lines that are redacted for preventing mimetic contamination or something like that. Like even the books that you buy are censored by the Imperium. So think about that as you're having factions fight one another, that they each bring their own perspective, and therefore that will dictate who they see as an enemy in a particular conflict. This is now when you layer on top of all these what we just talked about, like the idea that information is tightly controlled by the Imperium, things get real murky. So getting practical with it, let's say you in your army, you like Terminators. I like Terminators. Say you wanted to bring a whole bunch of them to a battle that didn't have any Terminators talked about or recorded to it. And that's how you wanted to frame your army, as my collection is representing this battle. I like Terminators even though there's none depicted in art or story or anything. Maybe the Imperium expunged all records of those Terminators being there because they had chaos symbols and all kinds of profane things written across their armor, and so some Inquisitor was like, we can't have that because we don't want anyone getting ideas, so they just scratched the line and deleted it. Any information that they don't like or conflicts with their history or their beliefs is immediately redacted. So, in that sense, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know if the Terminators were actually there or not. You can't trust them because all of the narrators are very unreliable. The only information we have, or at least what we think we have, is what the Imperium wants us to have. And that makes it a very fun experiment to start trying new things, bringing units that weren't traditionally there, maybe marks of armor that not every legion canonically would have. You know, you can just experiment with things because the universe is so vast and so crazy. These situations are not unlikely, especially when you factor in how much like lying goes in between the government talking to their people. And the last point I have here is just that war is very confusing, and I think Forge World nailed it with their third book, I think it is? Extermination. Yes, Horus Heresy Extermination. The heresy has already begun. Alpha Legion was sent to go pilfer some planet and basically get them on our side as the Chaos guys. And while they're planning and plotting and scheming, an Iron Warrior ship comes into the system. Now, at this point, you would think, oh, they're both traitors. They're on the same side. They'll work together to beat the good guys. Not so, because these Iron Warriors didn't know about the heresy. They were out traveling. They were in the warp. They weren't able to attend the Istvan massacre or anything like that. So now we have a situation where there's one loyalist, two traitors, but the Alpha Legion have to fight both of them because none of these individual warbands, factions, armies know what's going on. Communication and miscommunication is a huge theme that happens all throughout the Horus Heresy. Humanity uses the warp to communicate, but then all of a sudden the warp goes nuts because chaos is ascending as Horus does the heresy. And this is how we get really cool instances like the betrayal at Calth. The heresy had already begun, but the Ultramarines had no idea because no one had communicated it to them. So this trap is sprung after all the things have already begun. There are ships in space in the warp that are traveling for long distances, that were out in the far reaches of the Milky Way, who have never heard of anything. So when they come back into system and they see what's going on, there is a lot of possibility for friendly fire, mistreating, misunderstandings, that kind of thing. This is my favorite way to explain why two loyalists would fight each other, right? Because everything's so complicated. If a loyalist army came back into the system and first met, like, say, a Death Guard soldier, and the Death Guard soldier told them, hey, listen, the Council of Terra betrayed us all. They tried to usurp the Emperor, and they took these 9 legions with them. We need to go kick their tails. Horus is leading us to go reclaim Terra. Well, that from his perspective is a complete story and makes sense, even though it's a lie. What do you think that Space Marine chapter would do? Of course they'd go fight. A loyalist would fight alongside a traitor against loyalists for the sake of preserving the Imperium. What if fleets are bound to one another? This happens a lot in 40k, specifically with the Red Corsairs and some of their stories, which were also Forge World ones, but essentially there was a Space Marine chapter that was falling to chaos, and along the way they called in some debts from actual loyalist Space Marines to help them, but that made them guilty by association. All they were doing was honoring a promise they had made before, but now they're roped into this complex system of alliances, and everyone's trying to maintain their honor while defeating chaos, but it leads to some very weird engagements where good guys are fighting good guys, bad guys are manipulating the whole thing. Not to mention the fact that, like, Forge World has tons of color palettes and that kind of stuff, and armor arrangements and designs for every legion from everywhere. So when you put all this together, what I'm really trying to get at here is that there's so much room for storytelling and design and miscommunication and lies and all this stuff to make really compelling armies, very unique ones, I might add. And so let's break down why I think this is so stinking cool. The ideas and perspectives that are born from unreliable narrators make infinite room, in my opinion, for historical type gaming to have a lot of freedom to it, where your troops lied about any number of things, like what battle honors have they accomplished that lead them to this point, how brash or short-sighted are the leaders of your army, where were they during some very pivotal moments, think like Istvan, certain moments like Battle of Calth or Prospero, or were they just nowhere? Were they just like off doing an expedition thing because the expedition is still happening at this point? In this way, sure, let's say I play Death Guard, for example, my Death Guard don't have to look anything like yours. They've had different honors, different histories, different divergent paths, and maybe mine are more loyalist than yours are traitor. The Forge World campaign books have like, I think 6 or 7 color palettes for each type of legion. Like there's a lot of different variety there. So between where yours could be, maybe in the Immaterium as things are going down, they come out, they look a little different, they don't know what's going on, and they get themselves into some trouble. At that point, they can join up with the Loyalists, they can disavow their Primarch, they can do whatever they like. Not to mention the idea of black shields of people who are just, or Astartes rather, that are just so fed up with their own chapter or legion or whatever that they just leave it, take on no markings, they're known as black shields, and they congregate into their own fighting force. And lastly, there's a lot of rules that don't dictate loyalist or traitor. So when you're actually playing the game, okay, people who are doing their whole historical intensity regarding 40k literature, put that off to the side. Rules wise, you are incentivized to either choose loyalist or traitor for every single legion. Even the ones that are super evil, there are ways to build the army that don't necessarily lean into traitor. And I like that. I like that quite a bit. Now, of course, you are incentivized with certain army builds and that kind of thing to lean one way or the other, and that makes perfect sense. But there's no absolute way to do it. And that's, I think, a thing that people miss when they get so focused on the minutia and what is canon and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, Games Workshop has created a sandbox for us to play in. They have created a system to where we can recreate just about any battle we want with a lot of freedom. People are, might say that whatever you're doing is like wrong. Who cares? They didn't buy it for you. Do whatever you want. Have fun. Make some really cool stories and let me know about them. Anyway, friends, that's it for me. Just talking about how different traitors and factions and splinter factions of splinter factions can come into existence. Thank you so much for your question there. And if you have any more, go ahead and leave them down below. I'll answer them then. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.